This is Terms of Reference podcast number 177.
There's so many interesting things to try in so many different technical areas that the easiest thing to do is to work with those who have a receptive ear, receptive mind to the idea of trying something new. So it's a mechanism. We don't get a big budget and start spending it. It's when USAID missions or USAID Washington wants to try something, they put money into the mechanism and then we make it happen.
This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. If you're an ideas person, no matter what your field or expertise, there's nothing I can think of that's more attractive than a clear, tangible problem in need of a solution. As much as we hate to admit it in the social sector, these types of problems are not terribly common, and they're almost never the lowest hanging fruit in a given situation. But in those instances where clear problems in need of solutions are identified, the next most attractive thing to an innovator is funding to play with. I mean that in the most generous way, of course, given that at the end of the day, we don't just want to play, we want to find answers. As I think you'll agree after listening to today's 177th episode of the Terms of Reference podcast, my guest, Troy Etulain, has a job that seems quite a bit more play than work. He's the project director of FHI360's Mobile Solutions Technical Assistance and Research Project, or mSTAR for short, and he's also the head of FHI's Digital Development Unit. Well, again, Troy doesn't just have funding to play with. He does oversee a mechanism that is built to identify clear problems and then take action to find potential solutions. We talk about Wi-Fi that covers 50 kilometers, financial technologies that are increasing inclusion, the new business models that are driving rural mobile network development, mapping the unconnected areas of the world, and much, much more. I hope you'll find Troy's enthusiasm as infectious as I did. I spoke with Troy in Washington, D.C. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor.
The Terms of Reference podcast is sponsored by International Solutions Group, helping to improve the social impact of governments, UN agencies, NGOs, and companies for more than 10 years. Visit ISG online at www.theisg.com.
Hello, Troy. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Hi, Stephen. It's really good to be here. Thank you.
Troy, you're a man of the world. Where do we find you sitting today?
I am in Washington, D.C. at the moment on a very beautiful morning. I just came from the Potomac and went out for a morning row in a kayak. It was quite good. It's really nice here today.
Oh, now you just stabbed a knife in my heart. That I can handle DC in the fall. That's beautiful. But then you put the kayak in there. That's great. Thank you for being on the show. This is fantastic. You are the project director of FHI360's mSTAR project. We're going to talk about mobile data. We're going to talk about financial services, digital inclusion, a really interesting smorgasbord that we're going to talk about here. Why don't, as we usually do on the show, why don't we have you start by telling us what mSTAR is all about, and then we'll go from there.
Well, maybe we should spell out the acronym to start with. It's a project called the Mobile Solutions Technical Assistance and Research Project. It's tied with USAID's Global Development Lab, and it has a few key areas of focus: digital financial services, colloquially referred to as mobile money; digital inclusion, which really includes two topics: internet access and a focus on gender and ICT. The third area is like data for development, real-time data for adaptive management. It's sort of a data topic. And we also do a lot of work under mSTAR that has to do with technology, agriculture.
So just a small portfolio of topics to talk about today.
Yeah, it's a project that's been extended. It started in 2012. It'll go to 2019. We usually have 30 to 40 things going on at once. Field staff in about 6 countries. A lot of very, experimental things or cutting edge things, trying to prove concepts, trying to try out new approaches. It's a really diverse, interesting project.
So let me throw you what I hope is not a curveball right off the bat. So you're sitting as the project manager of this thing. How do you foster that ecosystem of, hey, go try it and go be experimental and go, break the future, and yet still, be able to come back and say, look, here's results. Here's what we're moving forward. Here's what it is. Or is that the whole point?
It is. There's so many interesting things to try in so many different technical areas that the easiest thing to do is to work with those who have a receptive ear, receptive mind to the idea of trying something new. So it's a mechanism. We don't get a big budget and start spending it. It's when USAID missions or USAID Washington wants to try something, they put money into the mechanism and then we make it happen. And so it's very much in partnership with USAID field missions when they have an existing project that they want to, add something technological to, or we run our own standalone projects as well. When a USAID mission is interested in trying something, some things we do are global in character. So with the real-time data work, we're looking at including the use of data for adaptive management in a variety of locations. It's very much who's game and who's interested now. So it's not like you have to do everywhere at once. So
can you give us a specific, I know real-time data, I spend most of my time in the monitoring and evaluation field. That's the thing, right? We want to know now. We want to know what's going on. Can you give us maybe one or two specific examples of what you're looking at in that area?
Well, so far we're just on the cusp of getting into the practical aspects of it. For about a year and a half, we've been going through a series of stages of engaging the intellectual, the academic community that focuses on adaptive management, and then doing research and finding case studies around the world where it happens. I think maybe more on the general level. What we're trying to do is look for projects that are designed from the beginning to pivot one way or the other, to make decisions based upon data that's coming in and be explicitly ready to go left or go right based upon what the data says, as opposed to, quarterly monitoring and evaluation check-ins, something more on a live basis, structuring data flows, creating data flows, using systems that include triggers or decision points at certain thresholds so that you say, you know what? We decided ahead of time that if we reach this threshold, we are going to expand this, shrink this, cut this off, add another project element. So we're looking at right now a couple of different incipient USAID activities that have an intentional adaptive management component. And we're looking at working with those projects to make sure that the technology side, the data side of it, is an explicit part of the project implementation. It's more than the technology, it's the mentality that I'm going to be data driven. I'm going to be, my decisions are based in data. So, that type of approach as opposed to, your quarterly reporting requirements for your typical USAID project, the mentality is what is new more than anything else.
And are you focusing mostly on implementing partners like yourself, like the FHI360s of the world, or is this focusing more on mission staff or?
We intend for this to be for IPs and for USAID missions. So my personal feeling is that it's best to get something at the ground floor, but it could be there are longer projects, say 5 years, where midway through they start a new line of work where it could be applicable. So it's meant to be for both ongoing projects and incipient ones.
I'd love to see, is there a specific example you could give to us about one of those projects where rather than a quarterly report, they're really being fed sort of either that, daily or weekly kind of data. And I was interested that you said they're built to be prepared to turn left or right. Do you have a practical example of what that might mean? Actually,
we're just kind of coming to the end of the research period, so I don't have them. And it's a bit early, but we will have those. The research isn't completed yet, but yeah, the stages we're going through the most recent stage has been to find those examples, to study what's consistent about them, to find common traits to those projects, and then to have that influence our thinking. But we're not there yet.
Okay. I'm going to try to pick a topic that maybe there are some specifics, like mobile money.
Yeah.
How does the mSTAR project, how have you invested in mobile money? I mean, mobile money's been around for a long time, quote unquote, in terms of the development world. Are there specific initiatives that you're pushing or researching or supporting in some way that you could tell us about?
Yeah, we've had a lot of success with digital financial services in a few places. Most recently in Bangladesh, we've had just really good success working with USAID IP, implementing partners to integrate digital financial services into various parts of different agricultural value chains. One of the things that we've accomplished I'm most proud about is a new loan product we've done with Bank Asia in Bangladesh farmers need to take credit to buy various agricultural inputs. But the typical repayment terms are not sensitive to when those farmers actually have money. So together with Bank Asia and one of the larger agriculture inputs providers in Bangladesh, we've created a loan product which is flexible with its repayment terms and is basically designed to be tied to the harvest cycle. So when you harvest your crop, you get paid, and that's when your loan is due. And you can repay your loan via mobile phone. So that has been, I think, it's been really well received by farmers. And I think that it'll really expand throughout the country because obviously such a large percentage of the population is related to the agricultural field. And that's been really good. In Liberia, we've had a lot of success digitizing the salary payments of civil servants, specifically those that fall under the ministries of health and education. And this is actually coming from Ebola, the Ebola crisis. So if you can imagine, Ebola just really was a shock to the systems and infrastructure and payment systems. And at that time, those community health workers who were based in the field treating and assisting those affected by Ebola, they weren't able to be paid. So after a while, there was still a health need in remote areas, but they had to come back in to get paid. And so they left places. So the idea is to make the system more robust such that if there is a future outbreak of a disease like Ebola or Ebola itself, that those people can stay in the field because now they get paid via mobile phones, So
generally, isn't that just a good efficiency as well? I mean, rather than I was looking over, I completely respect the emergency humanitarian situation thing, but I was actually looking over some of the fact sheets that you had about the Liberia case, and something about 100% of, I think it was teachers, said that this saved them time, and it literally reduced their workload by like hours during the week, right?
Yeah, the teachers example is a great one to point to. We did a small study on what their experience is like, and it was like they saved I think 20 hours on average, because they have to walk long distances and then they have to wait in line. Hopefully the bank has money. Often the guard of the bank wants his portion, and then the teller of the bank wants their portion. So by the time they've gone to collect their salary, they've lost a lot of it and they've lost a lot of time. So now, they just have to go to a mobile money agent. They get an SMS, and the agent cashes them out, and then they've saved time and money. And we've actually had success. So there are main mobile network operators in Liberia. One is the Lone Star, the local MTN office, and then Orange recently acquired another company. And we've been working with Orange to bring down their cash out fees down to the level of MTN. And we recently negotiated that. So we were really proud to basically play that role between, the government and the citizens and, the civil servants and the companies so that the whole system works better and then everybody wins. The ministry is more efficiently able to pay its staff members. The companies have more clients, using their services in the field. And obviously the people, as we discussed, they benefit also. That's kind of where we fit into this whole picture, where a company, is going about its business, but it's not necessarily thinking about expanding in the direction that we would development mindset have. And like in the connectivity field, for example, in digital inclusion, we play that role in a very strong way as well, I feel. And that's, like I was saying, this is one of my areas of greatest passion because there's a really large amount of people in the world who are still unconnected to the internet. Mm-hmm. And from our perspective, based upon the experiences that we have, there's no reason that those people need to remain unconnected. So if the population of the world is roughly 7.5 billion, still 2.5 billion lack any form of like mobile connection or internet connection. And really, like the message that I promote as often as I can is that we can actually connect everybody now. And it's not a matter of fancier technologies like low-hanging satellites or drones or those things.
I
actually have the potential.
We need balloons. We need balloons. Come on.
The Google Loon project has proven a bit successful. They're finding that as a B2B service that it does look viable, not a B2P, like not directly to consumer as a retail means of backhaul. But in any case, what we focus on is more on the ground, very innovative business models that take advantage of emerging technologies that are lower cost. They're lower power consumption. They run on solar and batteries, and they're structured to connect the last mile because they have lower operating costs and lower capital costs, to set them up. That means that in order for those companies installing these systems to earn revenue, they have to make less before they're in the black.
Before you go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to back up because we moved from mobile money to digital, sort of digital inclusion, right? So we're talking internet access here, and I really wanted to make sure that we also spoke to the sort of gender piece of it that you said earlier, right? But where we're at right now is you're talking about, as you said, last mile sort of internet provision or connectivity provision. Who's doing that? Are these homegrown solutions? Is this MTN waking up and saying, oh, hey, we need to go do that? Or where are those solutions coming from?
It's a really interesting situation right now. Actually, I really think of the last mile connectivity space as really dynamic. It's become dynamic in the last few years. So you have companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft doing a really interesting array of things, trying to crack the nut, trying to figure out how to profitably, in a commercially sustainable way, provide connectivity to poorest of the poor. So Facebook's made a number of different investments around the world. They've set up, there's internet.org, which is what's known as a zero-rated approach. So for those who have a phone, they're able to access Facebook for free. But aside from that, they've set up this telecom infra project, which is referred to as TIP. And TIP is involved in a number of companies which are making their own investments in innovation to basically bring down the cost of cellular infrastructure so that it's more affordable and more potentially profitable to set up smaller infrastructure in places where the people have less disposable income. So
Can you distinguish for, I'm lucky enough to be, a super wonk myself, but maybe for some of the people who are listening right now, can you compare, let's just say that I'm sitting in a big city and I'm getting my connection either through the mobile network or, through the cable that comes into my house. But then when I get out to the rural area, obviously, the mobile connection starts to break down. We're all familiar with that. Like, what would one of these last mile solutions look like? Is it a repeater somebody puts on top of their house? Is it, can you give us some, draw some picture?
So in your urban area, the cell tower itself is going to be maybe 50 to 100 meters tall. It's going to probably be connected to mains electricity. It'll have multiple generators with diesel fuel backing it up. And its connection to the system, to the overall network, which is what we refer to as backhaul, it may be fiber or cable or something. It's a part of an overall infrastructure. So when you go out to a more rural area, all of those points become challenging. But the solutions just evolve and it's very workable. It's very doable. So in places like rural Rwanda, there's an American company that produces its own low power consumption hardware, Vanu. They're out of Boston. They're building 20-meter towers as opposed to 50. They run only on solar and battery, so they don't have to, run diesel fuel on dirt roads in the rainy season to keep the things running. They can run, autonomously without, that kind of infrastructure. And then in terms of connecting that individual tower to the overall network, so you can call, somebody in the capital or basically anywhere in the world, they use different types of solutions rather than fiber because fiber is expensive. So you can use microwave repeaters, you can use long-range Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi as a technology, you think about it at your home, right? You have it in your house. You can go from the first floor to the third floor and you still have Wi-Fi, right?
Sometimes.
The
Wi-Fi,
yeah. I mean, the types of Wi-Fi that are out there now, they can go for 50 kilometers and connect with another router and then make a hop, to where there is a more, robust part of the overall nationwide infrastructure. And so, microwave hops that you can buy something for like $5,000, that's just the capital cost when you purchase the thing, then its operational costs are much lower than like satellite, for example. But the important part that is really where the evolution is happening right now is in the business model. So Vanu has a model where they only provide 2G, so basically just phone and text to that population. And they actually they haven't set up their own network. So you don't go and buy a SIM card from Vanu. Their business model is what's known as a white label business model. So they find their own capital, they set up their own infrastructure, and they form interoperability arrangements with the established companies that have the licenses that they paid for the spectrum. So if you pick up your phone in that rural community, it says like Airtel or MTN or one of the other companies, and you never know that you're on Vanu's network. And then they form a revenue sharing arrangement. So any traffic that goes via that tower, Vanu shares the revenue. But there's another part of the business model which is really interesting, and that is from the tower itself, there's free Wi-Fi. So if you have access to a Wi-Fi enabled device, you can just walk within range of the tower and surf the internet for free. But the profit comes from that Wi-Fi being ad supported. So like you're on the Wi-Fi and then like a commercial interrupts you and then Vanu gets that ad revenue. So as a business model, that's distinct from where you are. Your company is only making money from data and phones and SMSs. But for this rural model, you split between Wi-Fi and 2G, which is quite interesting. And then also they've put these devices called bricks. It's a company out of Kenya on each tower. And basically it's like a 4 or 5 terabyte device with 4 or 5 terabytes worth of storage. So anytime somebody like consumes a video from YouTube, that video is then stored locally. So the next person who wants to see it, they only stream it from that device from the tower. So the quality is just that much better.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it's different, not just in the hardware, but in the business model. And like companies looking at being both the last mile connectivity provider and a solar power provider, because you have this same problem. If you're remote, you're lacking cell service and you're lacking electricity, right? So some companies are looking at providing both of those at the same time. And the actual off-grid, these solar arrays that power small communities that are not connected to mains electricity, those smart meters actually have SIM cards in them. So you see the symbiotic relationship between the business models of connectivity provision and electricity provision.
I think you have to be deaf on our show to not hear how passionate you are about these topics that we're talking about. What's your role? Are you guys cheerleaders? Are you injecting money? Are you program managers? Are you coming up with the ideas? Like, you gave us the example of mobile money earlier. Are you a catalyst? Like, how do you think of yourself as a team, and how are you interacting with all of these players?
We are doing so many interesting things. Generally speaking, we are trying to form bridges and bring together various players and address kind of an overall information gap. So it's really exciting. So where to begin? So one of the things that we are doing has been investing in researching these types of business models like I've just been describing, and then promoting them to the world to spark interest from either entrepreneurs or investors into the profit potential for providing connectivity to these unconnected populations around the world. So about a year and a half ago, we produced this business models for the last billion report on our blog, mstarproject.wordpress.com. And then most recently, we produced a tool for companies looking to kind of combine these different revenue streams for the provision of last mile connectivity. So that is on digitaldevelopment.org, the USAID, the lab's website, where they capture a lot of their tools. So we did that for USAID. You can basically go and punch in numbers, and you can say, okay, I'm going to have Wi-Fi and 2G, or I'm going to have just 3G, and that's going to be my business model. And it allows you to see how much investment is going to be required before, and how much time needs to pass before you're going to turn a profit. So we've tried to make it easier for would-be entrepreneurs to plan out these last mile connectivity like operations. We're also on the cusp of doing we actually initiated already a lot of outreach to would-be investors, including those who declare themselves to be social impact investors. So last week we had my team, we were there with USAID in Jakarta at two different social impact investment forums. One of them was Sankop, the other one was TBN, I forgot what it stands for. And we have panels where we talk about the investment potential for these last mile operations, trying to pique the interest of would-be investors. And so, like I was saying, in terms of the information gap, what we're bringing to them, we have some other initiatives. We're going to be working with the largest trade association for mobile network operators to produce more highly accurate maps of the unconnected areas are in the world. So you can then take, Columbia University, with the support of one of Facebook's initiatives, has produced unprecedentedly accurate population maps for a number of developing countries. So you take that data plus the data of, where there is no signal, and it allows you to produce a much clearer picture of what the addressable market is for connectivity.
Let me just step in for just a second. What's been the appetite of those investors? Are you finding that these are very sort of your classic entrepreneur people who've made a little bit of money and, they're looking for the next high risk opportunity, or these institutional kinds of investors you're talking about who are, they want to take a little risk, but they're looking more for a bigger long-term sustainable play? Are people looking for moonshots? What kind of investors attracted to this?
You find that we've just launched this process, but the investors that I've spoken with are most interested in like the largest markets possible. So Nigeria, for example, has a really large population, amongst African countries, and a really large unconnected population. So there's a lot of interest in the potential scale of that profit. There's a ton of stuff going on in Ghana. There's a lot of interest in DRC because DRC also has a large population and it presents a really great market for last mile solutions. Actually, my personal experience, my most sort of professionally rewarding experience was in Congo years ago when I was working with USAID. So you find that they are really interested, and it's a very country by country type of discussion because, just the players, the laws, the dynamics, the population size, and so on they just really vary country by country. One of the other things that we're doing is going to be developing a mixed set of indicators and measurements by which you measure simultaneously commercial returns and social impact, because a lot of the types of investors out there that are going to be interested in last mile connectivity opportunities are specifically those like social impact investors. We want to enable them to, for example, if it's a social impact investment fund, we want to enable them to have an easier time of telling the story of the results to their individual investors. And so that's one of the other things we're doing kind of on the information side. We're also going to be, we're planning to we're in discussions right now with the World Economic Forum, which has been supporting an investor matching platform aiming to introduce some maybe the more last mile, the rougher, the tougher, more underserved markets to that whole global platform so that these opportunities are easier to find for would-be investors.
Again, I'm blown away by just the breadth of the portfolio your brain has to pay attention to. So you said that this project's been going on since 2011, if I remember correctly. 2012. I'm going to assume that maybe there's a 5-year cycle you're coming up against. Are you able to look, a couple years down the line and see, like how you're going to continue to bend and grow this thing? Or are you looking at wrap-up stage? I guess you've already said, you're just completing the research, you're just completing, some of these pilot projects. So do you still have quite a runway on this thing?
Yeah, since I started managing the project about 2.5 years ago, and they fortunately extended it so it's going to be a 7-year project in the end, which is good. So we do have some runway still. Looking down the road a bit, at FHI, like we very much are about public-private partnerships, and this is a USAID-funded project, but it's definitely one that, consistent with the way FHI works, it involves a lot of collaboration with the private sector, and I think that more and more collaborations are a part of our future in this technical area. So, like yesterday, I was speaking with the Trade Association for Tower Companies. Now, we actually haven't brought in tower companies to this whole connectivity equation. It's actually quite important. Mobile network operators around the world have realized in, say, the last 5-10 years that they actually don't need to own their own infrastructure for their businesses to be successful. So what they've done is they've sold off their tower networks and then leased them back from tower companies. And if you go to this website for Tower Exchange and read their reports, you see that globally, tower companies' portfolios are growing at very high rates. But traditionally, so they own infrastructure in developed and developing countries, but traditionally they focused on the higher revenue markets. So they, like Bangkok, or just larger cities or urban areas where people can afford smartphones and can afford data plans. What we're going to be trying to do with tower companies is trying to bridge the gap between where they are right now, kind of focused on traditional business models and, larger scale infrastructure, and introducing them to this lower cost equipment and these business models with the aim of attracting them to evolving their own business models to include smaller scale, more remote infrastructure in their portfolios. We think that they stand to earn money. And, our goal is we're a nonprofit, right? We just have humanitarian and development goals. So if we can convince them to evolve their business model, entice them, to evolve, to invest in smaller infrastructure, that they win as well. So we're trying to collaborate with companies so that they're win-win situations. They win on profit, we win on development.
You've characterized it in a way that makes complete sense, right? And obviously, hey, you're going to be more profitable. We're solving we're achieving the development goal that we want. The people are achieving access, and it's this great trifecta of wonderfulness. What kind of problems are you running up against? What are the challenges that you find when you go and you talk about mobile money or creating these connectivity partnerships, or you talk about adaptive management? I guess you're just doing the research there. Where's the resistance come from? Is it just the volume? Is it just the size of the problem? Or are people pushing back for some reason?
I think that people don't want to be first. They want to see a really huge success story where an underdog came up and did last mile connectivity, maybe with a white label business model or a wholesale internet business model, and made a ton of money. And then they'll follow. So like I was saying, it's a really dynamic space right now. And it's only become dynamic, I would say, in the last 3 years or 2 years maybe. So like I said, we're just beginning all this really intensive outreach to impact investors, working on facilitating connections between entrepreneurs and investors, cataloging all of the different types of hardware, working on the data on where there are unconnected areas, making that data much more clear, much more accessible to would-be investors. It's kind of like my anticipation is that with a couple of success stories, it's just going to explode. And that's good, right? Like we care about connecting people to the internet because of all the realities of participating in a modern society, being connected to services, to education, to being aware of the opportunities that are out there for businesses to have more fluid trade amongst, for mobile money to do its job, like we were discussing earlier. It only works if there actually is a connection, right, to rural areas. So we really care about that. I've seen it really, I personally have an experience that has proven to me that this actually can be successful. A number of years ago, I was working for USAID, and I used to travel all the time doing technology for development projects. And I remember I'd come back from the field and I was only at my desk. I used to share half of a cube, was there for about 45 minutes and I get a call and it's like, Troy, can you go to Congo? And I'm like, yeah, what for? Like,
of course, I'm at my cube. Of course I can go to Congo.
I've thought about going there in the past, but, the situation was that the Lord's Resistance Army, this rebel group out of Uganda, which spread to then just Sudan, Central African Republic, and Northeast Congo, they had committed a really huge atrocity. They'd killed like 300 people, they'd kidnapped 300 more, but word of this massacre and this atrocity didn't reach the outside world for more than 3 weeks because there was just no communications infrastructure. And people were like, do something about it. Like, how can you address this with communications technology? So we led a team, we chartered a plane from Kinshasa, and we flew up via Kisangani up to this area, which is literally the center of Africa, Northeast DRC, near the border with these three other countries. And the challenge was, figure out how to make these people in what way. And eventually, I settled on small-scale cells that were powered by batteries and solar. They used satellite backhaul, but they had a special compression technology, these things which kind of sound geeky, right? They make a difference. And so we put in cell towers in the most dangerous locations. A lot of violence had occurred and hadn't been reported. And, we introduced the partner, which was Vodacom, to this technology, which they'd never considered before, right? They had that more larger scale, a more expensive diesel generator powered technology. And we said, no, look, use this technology and put it in the places where we want it to go. And they're like, okay, fine, let's do this. So we put in just 4 towers. But when they were exposed to this, just from a commercial side of just looking at the numbers, they realized that because of the lower capital expenditures required to set these things up, you can put them on buildings, right? You can put this on a tree. And by the way, in Bangladesh, they're building cell towers with bamboo now. There's a really interesting experiment that's gone on there. So you find a building like a church on the hill and you put it on the bell tower, and you've taken advantage of existing infrastructure, and the radius of that tower is maybe 10, 15 kilometers. Because it's a small population, that's enough. So anyway, when Vodacom took a look at the numbers of these small sites that we put in, they're like, oh, wow, we could actually make a lot of money connecting other parts of the country which are less dangerous. So they then in turn installed 150 small sites in other parts of the DRC and made a lot of money from it. It's actually funny. I was at a Telecom Infra Project conference last year, and I ran into my former colleague when we were doing negotiations with Vodacom on the other side. He now works for Facebook. And he said, Troy, those small towers are earning millions a month for Vodacom. Forget about the larger infrastructure. And the profound thing that I actually didn't think about at the time, because you kind of analyze that small community, like, well, how many people live here? What's their disposable income? And then I was just surprised that actually a lot of the revenue doesn't come from those people. It comes from people calling into those communities. So it's like implied revenue because their children have gone off to study or gone off to find work in the cities, and the parents remained, as farmers in these areas, like in Niangara and Ango, these places where we were. So those towers were making money. So it was this commercially sustainable humanitarian project with communications technology.
That is a beautiful story, and it leads me well into sort of one of the questions I usually ask is, can you give us an example of how things that you've looked at as an innovation or disruption have become sort of a standard operation, right? And so in that case, the small tower, the mobile tower, the lightweight tower, I don't have a good name for it.
Small site, yeah. Small site.
Yeah, the small site. It's becoming almost the preferred model, right? Simply because you can put it in, it's low cost, and it's profitable probably very quickly, and it's durable at the end of the day.
Yeah. Ironically, actually, small infrastructure is also going into urban areas as well. They talk about densifying the network because there's so much data demand. You find much, much smaller devices also in urban areas, maybe unexpectedly, because those are primarily about data traffic. The cool thing is that there's some synergies between the technologies which are about making connections better for urban areas and rural areas as well. Anyway, I find that interesting.
I'm not sure what question to ask next. You've given us so much to, sort of consider here across this mSTAR project and just, across the different areas that you look at. Is there any one area that you are most excited about, beyond, you said the business models are the future of connectivity, right?
Yeah.
Are there other areas that you're particularly excited about? I mean, we talked a lot about mobile connectivity. I'm just thinking about the real-time data piece or mobile money, or the fourth area, which is I just wrote down as tech.
There's some really challenges out there. Whereas in last mile connectivity, there is really a lot of momentum, and they're like, I didn't even mention TV white spaces or, Microsoft's efforts to promote dynamic spectrum usage, which is a whole nother topic for connectivity. One area we're going to be doing a bit of research in India relates to the cultural factors limiting equitable access to communications technology between men and women. The research consistently shows that, women, a huge percentage, like a much lower percentage of women have access to mobile phones, to the internet, because their husbands often will limit them from having that. And, obviously from a development perspective, you really care about that type of inequitable access within a population. So if you think about the role women play in families, and there was research in West Africa a few years ago that showed that given a really small amount of income, that single mothers will still spend a significant percentage of their money on communications, because it is a very important part of their livelihoods. Communicating, trading, just the fact that in other parts of the world, women have a lot less access to communications technology is a big issue. And you're talking about cultural factors, right? This isn't a business case. This isn't a business model or a technology solution. It's a cultural one, right? So the research that we're going to be looking at in India to start with, I think is really high importance. And I think everybody should be thinking about how we crack the nut of the cultural factors limiting access to communications technology.
Troy, I have two questions that I ask everybody at the end of one of these interviews. One is, you've already put, again, and I'm not sort of just blowing smoke here, just the breadth of the topics that we've talked about thus far is quite fantastic. It always gets me energized. I love it. But who do you pay attention to? I mean, are there Twitter feeds, are there blogs, are there magazines that you read, or, is there some secret stash of network or information that you look at that other people should know about in order to take part in some of these initiatives?
I really admire a couple of people in this field. Obviously, I'm very passionate about connectivity, and there are some people that really know this stuff very well, and I think are very generous of spirit, in terms of sharing information and being open to everybody's ideas. So I think that Steve Song, he's got a number of blogs. Minipossibilities.net. I think he's turned to by everybody in the world, from the United Nations to Facebook. People want to talk to Steve, and he's been an entrepreneur. He had a really interesting technology. I don't know if it's still going or not. He wanted to connect communities via mesh networks, and he built a piece of hardware called Mesh Potato. And then there's a guy at AID, our counterpart, who's really a great collaborator named John Garrity, who came from Cisco to the USAID not too long ago. He also is just a really big thinker and very active person, making all kinds of connections, reaching out to anybody that possibly could be a collaborator. It's really lucky that he's a part of our work on connectivity. He's probably the main factor that's really driving this forward from the USAID side. Yeah.
And my last question is, again, this will be probably a little difficult to answer, but is there an innovation, a trend, a shiny new object, a process that you are particularly excited about? I guess, it could be in the connectivity, but I usually try to ask somewhere outside your professional expertise, right? That you just think is super cool and that the world should know about. Maybe you want to give a shout out to it?
I have a huge interest in digital identities, actually. So the extent to which identity is a tool for your inclusion in society and your economy, your ability to study, your ability to get credit, your ability to get benefits from your government. A lot of people don't have identities in the world, or what they have is just sort of really not up to, I guess, an acceptable standard. So the ability to use biometric information stored in a secure way. The word on the top of my wall, I painted my wall whiteboard paint. The word on the top of my wall is inclusion. Like, that's what we really care about. It's not about the technology for the technology's sake, right? It's about working hard in creative ways so that people have chances, right? That they are included in their societies. Like, that's what we really care about. So I think that is an area that's it's also very nascent, I feel, in application. You see refugees in Jordan, going up to an ATM where they verify who they are, their iris, right? But I feel like for development, it's an area of great potential.
Troy, this has been a fantastic conversation. So much meat, on the bone for all of our listeners to chew on, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. I really love this area, and it's a tremendous, honor to be able to work in this field. So thanks for the interest, Stephen.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from Aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.